Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're pleased to welcome Karen Moreau, President, CEO, and co-founder of the Foundation for Land and Liberty. Karen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bill. Great to be here.
Karen, you grew up on a mushroom farm in upstate New York. It's the last commercial mushroom farm still standing in a state that once hosted a thriving industry. Despite becoming a lawyer, you opened up a farm market 20 years ago to retail your family's products and maybe teach your kids a few things about running a family business. Is this a lost cause? It doesn't take an economic genius to figure out that rural New York is dying. What's killing it?
Well, we don't believe it's a lost cause because we're, frankly, as a family, and a number of my siblings are involved in farming. They're entrepreneurs and small business people. We don't believe in lost causes, number one. But the reason why we are becoming almost unique and obsolete at the same time is because of the policies of our state governments, local governments, and a movement really in New York that's dominated politically by New York City and their power and influence, where they've actually, many of these folks who have made their living in the city have pushed out into upstate New York, taken over town boards, zoning boards, implemented their own worldview on local residents, and in the process have really chilled that age-old American can-do attitude and the idea of self-determination in upstate rural communities.
You know, I live in Boston, and just north of us we have Live Free or Die, New Hampshire. Do you know what they call all the folks like that who move up from Massachusetts?
No.
Massholes. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
Sounds appropriate.
It's a very common topic in this part of the world. I know not just is the farming business in retreat, but wasn't there once a big cement industry in upstate New York? It's pretty much gone now, isn't it?
Sure. In the Hudson Valley where I grew up and where our family's mushroom farm still stands on the shores of the Hudson River, back in the 40s, certainly there were over 40 mushroom farms, but at the same time there were at least 3 huge cement plants. My grandfather, who was a Croatian immigrant, along with many other Croatian and Italian and other ethnic groups, they were laborers in those cement plants. And my family story is really not different than many of the people across the United States, where my grandfather, as a laborer, shoveled coal to heat the kilns in the cement industry in the Hudson Valley and in the town of Catskill. That's where we were. And at the same time, his family, and he had a very large family, 13 children, they were farming during the day. And so they were farming for income, but they were also farming to take care of their families. And this was very common. And when my grandfather saved enough money to leave that rented farm on cement plant property, he moved up the Hudson River a few miles. And back in those days, my dad and my uncles drove their herd of cattle up along the railroad tracks to the new farm they had just bought. It was an overgrown, rundown place, 100 acres on the Hudson River. And my grandfather actually started growing mushrooms while he was still working for the cement industry. So the cement industry in the Hudson Valley was the anchor industry, which provided thousands of jobs to hardworking people, many of whom had no education, many of whom had come from faraway places. And then their offspring, it gave them a leg up in the world. I mean, it gave these families a way of earning a stable income. And then while I was a child growing up in the town of Catskill, and I look back on my childhood as being ideal in the sense that we had a very strong and vibrant middle class. Most of the kids in my class or families worked in manufacturing or in production industry like the cement plants. And as a result, we had a very strong little community, and, churches prospered, civic groups prospered. And as I grew up and grew older, and ultimately I went to law school, but I remained in the area, I observed and watched as these industries shut down one by one. And, it was due to a number of factors, and certainly it was due to international economic factors, but very much tied towards this movement in New York State, again, dominated by New York City elites, pushing up into the Hudson Valley, these environmental groups such as Scenic Hudson and Riverkeeper and others pushing their agenda on the local communities ultimately took form back in Mario Cuomo's administration in the form of the Hudson River Valley Greenway.
Well, let's get into that a little bit. Confiscatory zoning laws on eminent domain are powerful tools that can completely upend the concept of private property. Take us through a bit of history of how these tools have been used to reshape upstate New York.
Well, I really cut my teeth as a young attorney right out of law school on this whole Hudson River Valley Greenway proposal. That was my first run-in, if you will, with the power of the environmental lobby and their influence on government and government officials to create zoning and regulation of a person's land that would ultimately lead to control and dominance by those people who are in charge. Mm. In this case, that was Mario Cuomo's administration. When they proposed the Greenway, initially they included in their proposal the power of eminent domain, which would have allowed the government really to take land along the river for things like a walking trail. And our family's farm is right on the Hudson River. Mm-hmm. Beautiful piece of property. It would have been significantly impacted by this. Myself as a young lawyer and with others, farmers and landowners, many of whom were immigrants who really understood or had left governments, across the ocean that were totalitarian in nature, they understood the force of government power and its impact on land.
Other states have tried to use these zoning and eminent domain rules to stimulate the economy. I mean, much of this has been ham-handed or backfired, but the stated goal was always to increase both economic activity and grow the tax base. Why has New York chosen to use these tools to create a pastoral dead zone?
They try to sell it as, improving the tourist-based economy. But, study after study has shown, and frankly, you don't even need to study to see what's happened to upstate New York. It's shown that, you cannot create the types of economic output and jobs as you would in a manufacturing environment or in typical production agriculture and production industries. Why have they done this? I think overall it's some powerful people that have determined that the land is there for their benefit, for their view, for their, peace, quality of life. And typically they've made their money elsewhere. They've made their money in New York City, whether it's in, on the stock exchange, or they've made their money somewhere else. Now they've come up to these rural parts, and the Hudson Valley is just one place. Most of upstate New York is like this. They've come in and they have implemented their rules. They're very savvy typically.
It's new landed gentry.
It is. It is. And I view the result as, frankly, I call it rural cleansing. The longtime folks who have been there, families for generations, maybe farmed for generations or tried to run a business, they are eventually pushed out, or they're carrying such a weight of taxation and regulation that they find themselves as the last man standing, not unlike my own family in the Hudson Valley today.
Karen, right across the border in Pennsylvania, there's an economic bonanza going on because of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, what we know as fracking, which has completely revolutionized the energy industry. So far, New York has missed the bus on this. How come?
Well, it really comes down to the fact that our Governor Cuomo, caved under pressure from the likes of Bobby Kennedy and the environmental activist movement in New York State. And after almost 7 years of a moratorium that was put in place by executive order, he decided not to lift that moratorium, therefore creating a permanent, at least while he's governor, ban on fracking. And it's really as a result of that. The science, if anyone knows and has learned anything about fracking, the science is there to support the fact that this can be done safely. It's been done safely across the nation, over 30 states, over 60 years. Millions of wells hydraulically fractured to produce the oil and gas in this country that we so much depend upon. That's what happened in upstate New York. And the sad thing is, and the reason why I became involved in the whole fight for fracking over 4 years ago, is that I saw landowners, mostly farmers, in the southern tier of New York State, right on that border with Pennsylvania. I saw in this a huge opportunity for them to elevate themselves and their families by leasing their land for fracking.
Karen, let's dig more deeply into both the economic and environmental impacts of fracking. And let's start with the former. The switch from coal to natural gas has caused U.S. carbon dioxide emissions to drop dramatically. I mean, I've seen estimates that show the U.S. contribution to emission reduction has been twice the total effect of the Kyoto Protocol on carbon emissions in the rest of the world, including the European Union. Why is fracking not being celebrated by global warming alarmists?
Well, 5 or 6 years ago, if you looked at a website for the NRDC and some of these other big environmental groups, they were touting natural gas as a bridge fuel to renewables. They were touting the benefits of natural gas. Once they determined that there was so much natural gas being produced that it would make their goals of renewables like solar and wind that much more unreachable in the free market, if you will, they realized that they had to do something to slow down the development of natural gas in this country. And the fracking movement gave them not only a way of doing that, but they saw it as a way to put fear into the hearts of people and to significantly raise money for their environmental groups. So there was a couple of things going on here. New York was really ground zero for this because we do have a very large shale play known as the Marcellus Shale, very much resembling what's gone on in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, same geologic formation. We have it under those counties that border Pennsylvania. So we have the resource there, unlike some other places that may have banned fracking.
So if you just look at it on a neutral basis, how do wind, solar, and biofuels stack up against fracking just when it comes to practical carbon emissions reduction?
Well, for example, take biofuels. The energy output of biofuels is so much less than that of oil or natural gas, both of which are mined in this country today using fracking. What that means is you have to grow more food actually for fuel, and you get less energy from that. Right now, if you look at the EIA, the Energy Information website, government website, you will see that a very small percentage of our energy comes from solar, wind, and other renewables
it's
such
still
as
pretty
biofuels.
Tiny, yeah.
It's very tiny, and yet this has been after 30 years of subsidies. It's still tiny. And with so much production having occurred in the United States and across the world due to improvements in technology, it's not just fracking, but fracking combined with precision horizontal drilling. That's led to this, what is right now actually a glut of oil and gas, and that's driven prices down, and it's been great for consumers.
So when you look at the economics of fracking, how does that compare to the enormous subsidies required to make so-called renewables viable?
Well, fracking, is not subsidized, and the government plays no role. For example, in the whole energy revolution that occurred across the country in the last 8 years and in Pennsylvania, there's no government money that has created all that wealth. There's no government money that's been put into creating those jobs. There were hundreds of thousands of jobs created in Pennsylvania in the last year due to fracking. Just to give you an example of the impact on rural people and what this could have meant for New York, only, literally a stone's throw away. In just 2 counties in Pennsylvania, 2 sparsely populated rural counties, landowners were paid over $500 million in royalties over 4 years. That kind of wealth generation put into the hands of local people who were reinvesting in their farms, their businesses, their homes, their schools was a tremendous impact. And they built new hospitals, and they built new churches, and the philanthropy in those places has dramatically increased. You don't see that anywhere in the country from solar and wind production.
Well, what about groundwater contamination? There's been a lot of concern that the chemicals pumped underground at frack wells can end up in our drinking water. Has that been the case?
Well, absolutely not. And you don't have to rely on people like me to say that. You can look to the EPA. You can look to the former head of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, when she testified before Congress that there's never been a single case of groundwater contamination due to fracking. The whole idea of energy production, regardless of whether it's oil and gas, solar, wind, whatever, any form of energy production will cause impact. whether it's impact on land, impact on populations.
Mm-hmm.
And the role of government should be to properly regulate that in a reasonable way that makes this safer and more beneficial for the community. But New York chose not to do that. New York chose to turn its back on all of this wealth creation. And frankly, this was the only hope. This was the last hope for vast regions of impoverished rural America located in upstate New York. And Cuomo had it given to him, handed to him by our creator, frankly, the opportunity to turn things around. And he blew it.
Karen, you mentioned that we're in the midst of a worldwide oil and gas glut with inflation-adjusted prices dropping back down to levels we haven't seen since the 60s. Has this taken the wind out of the sails of the fracking business?
Well, what it's caused is an awful lot of reorganization in the fracking industry. You see some companies merging with others. You've seen actually companies improving the bottom line by using more efficient technologies. It has caused an impact because, some people have been laid off in the industry. But they've gone on to other things because, frankly, they've developed skills. And even though this is, right now a period of reorganization and, you don't see the growth that we saw over the last 8 years, which was frankly exponential.
Mm-hmm.
What we do have is a tremendous opportunity with low-cost fuels, low-cost natural gas, which helps with the bottom line of anyone that wanted to manufacture in this country. You've seen, actually, in the last few years, companies coming over here from Europe, from Germany,
Sure,
building plants in Pennsylvania because of the proximity to a stable, low-cost source of natural gas.
right. Everything from fertilizer to plastics. I mean, it's a source
Exactly.
material in a lot of industries. I mean, people forget that John D. Rockefeller revolutionized the energy business by driving oil prices down, not up.
That's right. So there's always opportunity. When one business is hurting, frankly, there's opportunity elsewhere, as long as the government stays out of it. But in New York, what we have really is a state government led by Cuomo that has really determined that anything that's going to happen in New York in the form of economic development has to happen with his imprimatur and his public-private partnership. And he has decided to dump all kinds of taxpayer money into the solar industry. In fact, to the tune of close to $1 billion into a company named Solar City to build solar panels in Buffalo, New York.
Now, your organization produced a very thought-provoking video that I had a chance to watch while I was getting ready to chat with you. Tell us about that.
Well, the film that you're talking about is called The Empire State Divide, which is available on YouTube if someone Googles that. And they can also go to the Foundation for Land and Liberty.org website and watch it. I was inspired to make the film by a number of things. One is what I saw growing up in the Hudson Valley, this decline of industry, the loss of population, the loss of wonderful small towns as a result of the environmental movement pushing in and pushing out all forms of production industry. And that also seemed to segue right into what was happening in upstate New York, where these farmers weren't able to drill for natural gas. And as a result of doing a lot of traveling back in 2011 in Pennsylvania and seeing this amazing miracle that came about for small communities due to natural gas development, I thought that tying the two together, the loss of rural New York's vibrancy, coupled with the promise then of natural gas development, it seemed like a natural fit. So actually, the foundation made that film, and my family funded the film in honor of my father, Frank Bulich, who passed away a few years ago, and who was a strong believer in private property rights, and he loved farmers and loved hardworking people.
Tell us more about the Foundation for Land and Liberty. What's its mission, and how can people learn more?
The mission of the foundation is to educate people on how government policies such as zoning, such as moratoriums, such as other, examples, impacts the ownership of private property and ultimately impacts the ability of people to earn a living off the land. That's really what the mission is. We've chosen to do that making films. The Empire State Divide was one. We are working on some other film projects as an education tool. People can learn more about us by going to landandlibertyfoundation.org. We're based in New York, but we actually are looking at, we've looked at situations in other parts of the country. This whole idea of where rural people are being forced either off the land or they're put under so much regulation that it impedes their ability to earn a decent living. So that's what the foundation's about. As a result of a lot of the work I was doing back in 2011, researching about fracking, I ended up ultimately going to work in a paying position for the American Petroleum Institute. And today I head their New York office. My work for the foundation is pro bono.
Karen, it's a fascinating drama to watch from a distance. I wish you and your fellow upstate New Yorkers a lot of luck. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Bill. I hope things turn around for many good people up here.
That was Karen Moreau from the Foundation for Land and Liberty, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. You can check out Real Clear Radio on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.